Hello everybody, welcome back. This is week 5 and today is really one of my favorite topics for managing people and organization, planning. Now, why is planning my favorite topic? Because planning is really one of the core functions of management. And we've talked about it from week 1 in terms of the planning, organizing, leading and controlling. It is truly the most important one. And you might say, okay, Stan, why are you saying this? And I think I said it in week 1 already once, guys. Planning is the investment. Everything else is the cost. And throughout this lecture, perhaps keep this thought in your mind and it will perhaps become a little bit clearer to you why I'm saying that. And today, guys, it's a bit of a heavy lecture, I must say, but it's a very simple lecture as well. We talk about how do managers plan, the types of plans, and then where it's sort of a bit heavy, the tools, techniques, and processes are involved. So it's a bit of a take in and a bit of theory to take in there. But it will really help us understand the tools that we have for what we talked about last week. Remember, we talked about decision making. So planning is really then to support that decision making. And let's bring it straight to you guys. Why do you think managers truly plan? While I take a sip of my trusted coffee. Now, for those that sort of figured it out, you probably talked about this idea of in the future, we need to understand what's going on. We need to understand where we're headed with the organization. And you know, guys, there's some real, I must honestly say, there's some real bullshit on Facebook when people say if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Guys, that's not true. You can still, without planning, run a successful company. It's just very, very much harder and very much more unlikely, guys. The thing is that planning is the process of setting objectives, people, and determining them how to accomplish them. One and then the other. You have to set the objectives. And this is also why I put the second part in, guys. Planning involves deciding exactly what you want to do and the best way about it. So it's not like, oh, in the future, I want a job, I want a career, or I've got this problem, I'm gonna manage it roughly this way. That's not a plan, guys. A plan is very concrete. Before that is a concept, what we talked about, roughly this direction, roughly here. But the plan is based on that concept. What are the key points that we want to do? And planning, as we already said, guys, involves a set of objectives. And objectives are truly specific results, people, and they're usually expressed in measurable indicators, indices that you name it. So, for example, we're planning to have our new production. Tesla is going to have their new production facility in Berlin, for example, which caused a little bit of problems because they're cutting down a whole forest for it in German law. That's very tricky, but they have it achieved. So the objective, for example, was to get that deal signed. And a measurable indicator is a certain time period, deal signed or not signed, these kind of things, when the first stone will be laid for the factory, completion time. These are objectives. And the planning, of course, people, is exactly what you want to do. You want to have the facility running. You can have certain sub goals set, subcontractors done by this time, the electrician set by that time, second fitting set by that time. This is really, really important. Managers, you guys also deal with that. Don't think that you're not dealing with that, depending on the level that you're at. But at the same time, people, this also works at the top level. This idea, how do top managers plan? It's the same thing. If we really think about it, Nokia, for example, you all know Nokia phones. Fair enough. But did you know what Nokia's original product was? Nokia originally produced toilet paper. I know, right? Pun intended, guys, with current toilet paper crisis going on. I'm joking. But the thing is, you have to understand that this is also planning to say we are making this plan. We are going to make mobile phones now. That is a very specific plan, which will follow a set of objectives, how to accommodate that change. So that's top level planning, guys. And these objectives are very, very important. And they can relate to the individual, the group, or the whole organization. That really depends. Now, at the moment, guys, as you know, we are just a little bit in crisis with the current coronavirus. And a lot of countries, for example, had a lot of responses. This morning, Italy went in full lockdown, for example. But I want to show you what JP Morgan did. Of course, you all know JP Morgan, banking investment company. They announced on the 4th of March 2020 that they're having a pilot program, Project Kennedy. They're basically saying 10% of the company's 125,000 employees work from home. But that's not the point. You can say, well, then everyone does that. Everyone is doing that. No. Read further. Project Kennedy tests how effectively and efficiently people work from home. So it serves as a contingency plan, guys, but it's also testing whether traders and bankers can conduct business in other locations. JP Morgan is not doing this because they have to. Their employees seem to be still overall fine, but at the same time, they don't know if that's going to be in the foreseeable future with the current coronavirus crisis going on. So they're testing it, guys. So you can say, oh, but Stan, this is an action. No, this is a plan. Because if we look the next way, they look at the direction where they want to go and the best way to go about it. And that is what they're testing. Yes, it involves a little bit of organizing, leading, and controlling. But primarily, this is to test and to create plans for when it actually really happens for JP Morgan. So that's very, very interesting to understand. Remember that, people. Planning is the most important out of those four. And again, a very simple idea. Decide where you want to go, decide the best way about it. But you got to be concrete about it. Now, why is planning so important, guys? Because planning actually, and specifically, guys, scenario planning it's a really big part of planning, is identifying alternative future scenarios. This is really, really important. We must understand that perhaps our plan won't work. We need to have a plan B and plan C in place. And this is really important. And again, I'm here reiterating why planning is so important, because it's the starting point for all the other actions: organizing, leading, and controlling. Remember, we talked about goals, smart goals. I said, no, goals, guys, smarter. They need to be aligned as well. I'm going to repeat that also here a few times in the lecture. Your plans are useless, and organizing, leading, controlling is useless if the plan is not aligned to the organizational vision. So if your plan is faulty, the rest will also topple over. So the plan is the first domino, so to speak. And how that drops determines how organizing, leading, and controlling drops as well. Now, remember, people, scenario planning is really linked to the external environment. So scenario planning is, what if this happens? What if that happens? So we think managers at all levels, this can be top level and operational, strategic in the middle. You have to think about the environment that you're operating in, so you can prepare for shocks to the industry. And nobody really expected the coronavirus to go out of hand like that. That's why, for example, German DAX is down by minus, it's lost thousands of points. The ASX is down, Dow Jones is down, because nobody had a scenario for that in place. This is really, really interesting. And of course, sometimes this can be good things, this can be bad things. A lot of times since the 2001 World Trade Center attacks, we have a lot of crises disrupting the business world, the human world, people. This is something to think about. But we also had this idea of new technologies that really started disrupting also some of the business world. The Y2K scare, for example. I'll talk a little bit about that. But so scenario planning and planning is really thinking about the environment and making sure you're prepared for something that may or may not happen. And you might say, okay, fair enough. But then I'm gonna put to you guys first. We've talked about all this planning and all. Guys, what is a plan? Have a quick, I've sort of mentioned it in the lecture so far, but have a quick think about that. Now, a plan. What is it about? Is it something concrete? Is it something conceptual, people? And believe it or not, and this is a very important definition, a plan is a statement. Simple as that. A statement of intended means for accomplishing objectives. So that's why I put that picture there. That's really a plan, going from A to B to C to D to E. You name it. And there's 5 sequential steps in systematic planning. You don't always have to systematically plan, but it really does help in the very beginning. As I said, you have to really define your objectives. You said it in the very beginning. You have to be clear about it. You can't be ambiguous and vague about it. You have to be very clear where you want to go. That takes thought, okay? But what takes even more thought is, guys, the second one, where you stand in relation to objectives. And a lot of times people forget that. This is the one people forget the most, because we say, oh, I asked you, what do you want in your lives, for example? We asked that in the lectures, or we asked sort of questions in relation to your personal wants. And people say, oh, I want this, I want that. This is what I dream of. Okay, fair enough. But where do you stand right now in relation to that dream, to those objectives? Are you the little circle in the picture, the little circle on the top, or are you already one of the X's? So it's really important to take stock where you're at in relation to where you want to be. That is part of the planning process, because then you can develop certain premises regarding future conditions, certain steps, and then you can look at alternative actions, how to get there. And only then do you start organizing, leading, and controlling that. This is really, really important, guys. And these what if scenarios, these scenarios we've just talked about, scenario planning, it's really practiced by a lot of organizations now, because this is really the only true planning. It's good that you know where you want to go, but if you don't plan for alternatives, it becomes very, very risky. So this kind of scenario planning, what if component becomes increasingly important in the planning process. And you guys need to understand that. You need to come up with a plan B and plan C, for example. Very, very important. For example, guys, I know I'm not yet affected by it, but I have a plan in place. If my tutors for this unit fall out, I have a plan in place. Plan B and plan C is already there. Why? Because I don't want to deal with it when it happens. I won't have the time. I know that the decision has to be made too quick. So certain parameters are already in place for you guys. Don't you worry about that. But that is planning. That is really, really important. Again, bringing it back to the SMART TAR model, people, you know, specific, measurable, actionable, reasonable, timetabled, fine. But remember the aligned component, please. This is where the textbook, my friends, and the real world are not seeing eye to eye. Bain and Company in 2014, you can read it up online, they also brought this aligned thing in place, that the objectives need to be aligned in pursuit of the company's overall goals, and they need to be committed to, guys, and people need to be held accountable for delivering those goals. That is really more important, so you guys can make decisions more confidently. Do you see, guys, how it all links back to the decision making from last week, to the external environments, guys? Planning really brings all this now as a tool, as the first tool to you, and that is why it's such an important process. Now, we talked a little bit about types of plans used by managers, especially the scenario planning. But that's not the only plan, guys, that you can implement. We can also look at the idea of short range and long range plans. So a rule of thumb here is that short range plans cover 1 year or less, long range plans 3 or more years. Now, obviously, guys, this is probably not new to you. Top management is most likely to be involved in setting long-range plans for the whole organization. We talked about this in week 2 and week 1. And lower management, of course, strategic operational focuses on immediate and short-range plans. Fine. Guys, why I put the science here, time and culture here. Remember, time orientation varies with culture. This is from a very Western Anglo perspective, guys. For example, the Germans, for example, we're not Anglo, we're Central European. Long range is 5 years minimum, if not 10 years. The 10 years is really starting to become the rule. In Japan, guys, this 3 to 5 years is short term. When Matsushita Electronics, which you guys know under Panasonic, founded the company, he wrote a business plan for the next 150 years. The Japanese are very long-term thinkers. So this is taken from an Anglo perspective, but you can see, guys, it's really important that you understand, when you look at long and short range, that you understand the cultural context to it, so that everybody is on the same page. Really, really important. That doesn't mean long term here is more important than short term. Be careful with that, because strategic plans really follow the short range plans that looks at action directions for the organizations. And we also have tactical plans, people. They are then developed and used to implement strategic plans. So it's not all about planning to do. It's not just planning of what you want to achieve, but it's also planning of what to do. And I put this picture there, the strategy and tactics, the differences, planning, doing. The why and the how is addressed. Difficult to copy, easy to copy, you name it. So sometimes situations require immediate adjustments. They require an ad hoc fix, or they require the opportunity needs to be exploited now. We don't have time to fully think this through. So you need to be also quick on your feet with planning. You can't just say, we need to go back. We need to think about this. You don't have the time sometimes. Be careful with that. But of course, on the bottom end also, and very important as well, we need operational plans. What needs to be done in the short term to progress strategic objectives? And you might say, Stan, what is the difference between an operational plan and a strategy and tactics? Strategic plans and tactics are action directions for whatever you name it. The operational plans is still part of the planning phase on a very micro enterprise perspective, which however you can apply strategy and tactics to if you wish. So if we have a look at the operational plans, we can include production plans, financial plans, facilities, marketing, human resources. And there are also disruptions to which we need to apply strategy and tactics, people. Don't forget that. I really thought I make this very clear so that you can differentiate between the different types of planning. But also remember, they do overlap sometimes. This is also something to think about. They don't operate mutually exclusive. They actually operate overlappingly. Some strategies are part of operational plans. Some tactics are already part of the strategy. Some operational plan is already part of a long-term strategy, of a long-term plan that you've made. So they don't operate all in a vacuum. But here's the question, guys. You might say, well, Stan, this is very interesting. I mean, it sounds challenging, and it is. But do we always reinvent the wheel every time we plan? No, we don't, because as managers, guys, you would never get your work finished. So we have a few tools in place. We have a wheel in place that we need to perfect. Sometimes, yes, depending on the decisions, what we plan, we don't have a handbook, but a lot of things we do. And some of those planning handbooks, people, are actually policies and procedures. What do you think they are? They are plans, nothing else, guys. They're there to make your planning easier. So the policy is a standing plan. It communicates broad guidelines for decisions and actions. You guys on your ECU card have our 5 values as well that are attached to policies. And that's a plan how we should act around each other. So this decision doesn't always have to be made. That we have these planning foundation, these planning pieces in place that we can plan easier and that we can focus on the areas that we don't know instead of always reinventing the wheel. Is it still the same policy? Do we have to rethink it? We don't. Procedures as well, people, really important. If you see, especially in the Australian organizations, in specific or in all presentations, the first 2 slides, very important. Number 1, of course, we acknowledge the people who were here before us, and this is very significant in Australian culture that we have the Aboriginal Australians and the other Australians. I will call them for the sake of a better term. Please don't anybody take offense to that. I wouldn't know the specific terminology, but it's very important to acknowledge that. But then it immediately follows what to do in an emergency. And that's a procedure, my friends. Actions to be taken in specific situations. That is a plan and recommended sequence of events to accomplish a set of tasks. If there's a fire, you walk out. There's an escape plan in every corridor. Why is that there? So you guys don't have to plan when it comes to, for the sake of a better term, I apologize, shit hitting the fan. You can't plan. You don't have the time. You need to action. So the plans are already in place. So that is also, you'd be surprised. Those are real benefits and help to managers to plan for whatever they want. And you might say, well, Stan, what does policies and procedures have to do with strategic planning, for example? This is a very interesting question, because strategic planning, you might say, we're looking out for an overall organizational direction, which is fair enough. But remember, a procedure is not just a fire exit, is not just an escape plan. A procedure is also a certain operations plan. Perhaps a procedure is also in terms of how to set up a factory. Perhaps there's standardized procedures going on with the organization because it's their 4th and 5th factory. They want to standardize it. For example, Aldi. Every Aldi you walk into pretty much looks the same. There's a reason for that. Number 1, for the customers, but also for Aldi ergonomically, it makes the most sense. When I built these Aldis here in Western Australia, they all are pretty much the same inside, from the structure, how they're sorted out. So that is also a building procedure. Aldi says, this is our procedure, follow it. Here's the plan. Boom. They don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So it really does help to have in place for bigger planning as well, people. Keep that in mind. Another thing we need is budgets and project schedules. A budget, people, is simply a single-use plan that commits resources to project or activities. That's a budget. When we talk about a project, people ask, what's the budget? So basically, what's the resource plan? That's really, at the end of the day, they're asking. It's a really powerful tool because it allocates and commits resources, scarce resources, to a certain project. And oftentimes, there are multiple and competing uses for that budget. That money could be spent elsewhere, but it is planned for this project. So when you have a budget, You literally have a resource plan already in place that will help you determine what other plans are possible and what not. And budgets can be, fixed or flexible, guys. Fixed budget, you have $10,000 in place, spend it as you wish, or you have flexible budget, especially in construction, especially in bigger road projects. This is going on where you don't necessarily know how much you're going to spend, and there's an update every 1 or 2 years, every year perhaps, what you've spent, what you need. And oftentimes we always hear people are going over the budget, right? We always hear it in the news, going over budget. You know what that means? They haven't planned. When people go over budget, that means they haven't planned properly. That is a big takeaway from here. This is not to judge or to criticize, guys, but oftentimes staying in budget is something very, very important for a manager to do. And if you can do that, that makes you competitive. Instead of saying, oh, I blew the budget, I'm sorry, I need more money. That means you plan poorly because you should have seen it coming. Now, there's also different types of budgets. There's a zero-based budgets, guys. So basically there is project or activities that are brand new. Then we have a zero-based budget because we don't know the return and the refresher, so to speak, to the budget. And there's also, of course, then project schedules. Again, single-use plans for accomplishing that specific major project. So a budget and a project schedule, they kind of go hand in hand. And they're useful planning tools for managers if they use them properly. Now, that we've talked about planning here, guys, let's talk a little bit about tools, techniques, and processes. And you might say, well, Stan, you've just spoken about tools. No, not really. I've spoken about guides, policies, procedures, budgets, projects. These are guides. But what can we use to actually inform those guides? We need tools. And one of those tools, people, is forecasting. And forecasting is a conceptual tool, a mental tool, which is a process of making assumptions about what will happen in the future. Simple as that. Good plans involve forecast always. We anticipate this. We anticipate that. We do not anticipate this here. This is really, really important. This is implicit or explicit forecasting. We know this, therefore that. Or we are not sure, however, anticipate. That is implicit, guys. So keep that in mind. Forecast, of course, for success. You have to define success. This is really, really important when it comes to planning. What is success? So forecasting will help you understand what you need to predetermine for the success, which is forecasting. That can be done, people, on a qualitative level and on a quantitative level. Don't forget that. We can have, of course, a consumer market service. We can have the Delphi method, so people coming together and discussing together in a room, like a group discussion, but a Delphi method works on a much more critical scale there. We can have executive opinions. We can have a Salesforce composite. We can get all this quantitative data, but also we can get qualitative forecasting in terms of hard numbers, how long it took, you name it. That is the two ways we can forecast here. And forecasting is good enough, guys, but at the same time, you might not always be right. So therefore, you need contingency planning, a second one of those tools, people. It's similar to scenario planning, alternative course of actions, people, that can be implemented if and when the original plan proves inadequate, guys. So a scenario plan is, this is one scenario A, a scenario B, and this is scenario C. Okay, fine. A contingency plan is, we go with plan A, however, if that doesn't work, we go with plan B. However, if that doesn't work, we go with plan C. That determines sequence and already steps in place that those can be achieved. And when you need to achieve those are determined by so-called trigger points, people. There are certain indicators you really need to set for yourself as part of the planning. You need to set those indicators when you know that the plan is no longer desirable. So a lot of times, for example, contingency planning is in place with stock traders, when you have put and call options as well, or when you set yourself in your head, if the stock falls below $200, I'm just going to sell it. Or if it hits the $200 mark, I don't care if it goes to $300, I'm going to sell it at 200. That's contingency planning, guys. Really, really important, so that you have this in place. If it doesn't happen, I'll wait to 190, I still make money, and then I sell it. So you can really have these things in place, and they are in place. Contingency planning is a big thing when it comes to stock trade, people. Very, very important. Also, scenario planning, people. I talked about the Y2K scare, in case some people don't know. The Y2K scare was when we celebrated the year 2000. which a lot of people were very worried about because computers never had their clock reset. So they went to 97, 98, 99, 0. What happens then? And it was a scare people, and people didn't know what's going to happen. There were some scenarios, organizations. I know that a good friend of mine, they came up with scenarios if all their computers failed. They wrote scenarios how to work without computers, just in case this happens. Pilots also tested the systems. People were worried that airplanes would fail, actually. So pilots tested the systems and artificially put forward the clock and flew it. It was always big on the news, and they showed, yeah, look, nothing happens. SARS, which is similar to coronavirus now, there was also scenario planning in place, especially in Taiwan when I lived there in the late 90s, people. So scenario plans, as we talked about, again, a very powerful tool that anticipates certain things. And scenario planning, people, and you might have guessed it right, scenario planning can often follow contingency planning. If we have these different scenarios, we come up with different plans to actually be ready for all those what could happen. Also, people, have a look. The scenario planning, the benefits, people, because scenario planning lies right between strategy, environment, and forecasting. So you really have to take everything into account. And as you can see, people, it's a very complicated process, which then, of course, at the same time improves your focus and flexibility. It forces you to understand your organization just a little bit better. What do you do best? What do your customers need? How do you get it to them? But at the same time, people, are you able to change? Can you orientate yourself differently to the future, like Nokia did? Philips, they sold their entire light division. They sold their entire TV division. It was fantastic. But at the same time, now they're mostly focusing on medical because that's where they realize where their money is. And that is tough planning, guys. And to make that decision to say, no, we're dropping it despite we were good, but we're not good enough. That is really managerial planning there. This is a real scenario planning, and to think about this before and to make that decision, guys, because scenario planning, guys, improves action orientation. Philips now is committed to medtech. Really, really important, and they're doing good at it as well. But that really took that planning and sometimes also took that leap, because people, scenario planning keeps you in a state of readiness, people. You make yourself result, priority, advantage, and change oriented. It's not about, oh, we're good at that, let's just stick with it. No. Planning simply improves that coordination of your organization, improves that control. And sometimes that means taking something off that perhaps you thought is going to do well, but isn't. So it can be really tough, especially from an emotional level, to say, no, we've been in this so long, we can't drop it now. This is us. To say, no, this isn't us anymore. IBM, they used to make mainframes, people, International Business Machines. That's what their name is. Now they're a consulting company. A financial consulting company. International Business Machines is a financial consulting company. So it's really, really important to have your organization always in a state of readiness, changing scenarios. And IBM realized people don't buy mainframes anymore. We need to change. Otherwise, we don't survive as an organization. Results, priority, change oriented. And they realized they could use all that knowledge from their mainframes to become good consultants. Hey, and here they are. People, scenario planning also goes hand in hand with time management. As a manager, this is really important. And the one thing I really want to talk about here, not all these, but I want to talk about point 4. You have to understand the difference between what's important and what's urgent. Please understand it. Have a real reflection and think about it. What is important? What is urgent? What's urgent is not always important. And what is important to whom? That is also what you have to ask yourself. So if you really reflect, a lot of tasks are really not urgent and are really not important. They're artificially set so by certain people for no real outcome. So you have to be clear, number one, that then you put tasks properly in order. So you don't become calendar bound. Oh, you've got a meeting. Is that meeting important? Is it urgent? Think about it. A lot of times you are able to just say no to certain things and you won't get bogged down, people. This is really important. A lot of times we get bogged down. Sometimes as a good manager, you can say, I don't have time for this. This is not important enough. End of story. But to make that call, you have to think carefully. What is important? Why is it important? And why is it not, people? All right? Just keep that in mind a little bit. Looking at another tool, people, Benchmarking. Benchmarking is also one. How do we do as an organization really? How do we plan ahead and take stock where we're at? We can use benchmarking. We can have external comparisons, an organization's current performance against that of other. What are other people in other organizations are doing well? How can we incorporate these ideas? Kind of thing. Really, really important. I mean, look at Facebook, for example. Marketplace is not that old. And they took that, of course, from eBay, buy and sell. And Marketplace is booming because they don't charge these costs that, for example, eBay does. These kind of things. Or Twitter is very successful with the limitation of their characters that they allow. Also very interesting. YouTube as well. Simple videos uploading, or Pinterest pictures. It's really comparing what are others doing. Facebook has done is Facebook uploaded pictures, but they weren't dedicated to it. Instagram, for example, is later on bought by Facebook. Google Plus, for example, is not doing very well at all. Who's using Google Plus, guys? Probably not many of you. Why not? To be honest, I don't see the appeal. I don't see the standalone, to be absolutely honest. It's not convenient to use. I don't have an overview. It's not intuitive. So, and that's where perhaps Google didn't do benchmarking. What do others do well? How can we imitate that? How we can incorporate these ideas to us? So very, very important component as well. If you want to do good, in a sense, also there's nothing wrong with following the leader, people. You don't always have to. Sometimes it's okay to say it's not invented here. This is perfectly fine. Because if everything was invented in your organization, you wouldn't be very successful. Also follow things that have proven themselves and how people are using them, and benchmark yourself against those. Last but not least, people, of course, a big planning tool, and this is hard knowledge you have to know, is also for HR management by objectives, people. It's simply a structured form of communication in terms of you and your staff jointly sets performance objectives and review results. This is really, really important. And this is a planning cycle, people. We define our goals, we define objectives, we monitor those, we evaluate those, we provide feedback. That is part of the planning process, especially, people, the very beginning, the first two. And I'm going to bring this here a little bit more from a planning perspective, people. The key term here, people, and you might not get this, the key term here is jointly plan, jointly setting objectives, jointly setting standards, jointly choosing actions, jointly reviewing control. What I'm trying to say is, people, planning involves participation and involvement. Planning is a dialogue. You don't just sit in your office, you sit down, yeah, okay, I'm going to plan now and I'm going to have a plan and give it to everybody. Planning is a dialogue, people. You need to get people involved. And this is what we call participatory planning, people. Include the people who are affected by those plans or whose help is needed to implement them. The really, really important thing is that you genuinely involve these other people. This is really important, because if you have them involved, they're going to commit to it, people. And I know this takes more time, but trust me, you have a better time when implementing. And people need to be involved in every part of the way. Defining the planning objectives at the very top, determining those, developing those, identifying the actions, and implementing them. You build commitments, people. People want to have a voice. People want to be involved. People want to be part of it. Then you have the commitment. In summary, people, a very short lecture today. Planning is getting people on the bus and everyone buys a ticket. So planning means we all go into the same direction and everybody is committed to that direction. That is really what planning should do. And the involvement here, that is really the most important, the genuine involvement, people. Don't be impatient about this. Oh, this needs to get done. I don't have time for their opinions. They don't listen to me. This is where it's really important to manage your emotion, to manage the emotions of others. That emotional intelligence and social intelligence really comes into play, because otherwise you can have a plan. And if there's resistance to that plan, it's not going to be implemented very well. People won't care. People won't come up with alternatives. The contingency plans will not be in place properly. Get people on the bus. Get them to buy a ticket, people. That way, you're going to have not only a very enjoyable planning phase, but also a very effective one. Good plans implemented, people, always has the major people it concerns and the minor people it concerns involved and committed to it. Otherwise, it won't work. And you set and drop the first domino to the wonderful direction of next week, how we're actually going to organize right after, how to get that plan in motion. I really hope you enjoyed today's lecture. Thank you, everybody, and I see you in the next lecture.